Hello, junkies. Does my voice sound hoarse? If so, that is because I am actively recording GFL Book 6, the Gangster audiobook. Ooh, let me tell you, the opening chapters of this one had me crying a couple of times. Yes, there is crying in football. I am, at least this football. I'm pumped to be finally recording the audiobook for you. It's been several years in the making. We do not have a release date yet for the audio or the print or the ebook, but at this point, since we're recording it, that's the final step. It will not be long. I am 70 pages in to the 660-page long manuscript, and I hope to be at 100 pages in by day's end. This time next week, when I come back at you for episode number 38 of Nocturnal, I should be done recording the audiobook. It should be in edits, and the Steve the Iceberg, Ricky Berg will be working away in it. Including this episode of Nocturnal Throwback that you're about to listen to, there are only 4 episodes left. So get your questions and comments in for the Nocturnal Throwback Q&A episode. It's gonna be a party. You can email your question, text, audio, or video to info@emptyset. If it's audio or video, you have to keep it 20 seconds or less. Audio needs to be in MP3 format. If you want to send video, use your smartphone in vertical mode, as we're going to do the Q&A as a live stream, and you might get to see your happy face on our live show. So I got to get back into the booth, keep working on GFL Book 6 for you. In the meantime, you enjoy Nocturnal. Here we go with the original Talkie Talk from way back in 2008. Then you get episode 37. Enjoy! Welcome to the free podcast novel, Nocturnal. This is episode number 37. Not quite the last episode. Nocturnal is a podcast-only novel you can't buy in stores and you can't peek at the end. Written and performed by Scott Sigler. More information and more free stories available at scottsigler.com. This book contains adult language, mature situations, and lots of violence. Hello, junkies, and welcome to Nocturnal episode number 37. 57 minutes of pure story, and there is some intense action in this bad boy. I did tell you 37 would be the last episode. It's not. I lied. Just think of it like we're dating, and I lied to you. And yet, you love me anyways, and just can't leave. If you stay tuned after the 57 rockin' minutes that are coming your way, I'm going to tell you about a stocking stuffer gift I have put up at scottsigler.com, where you can make a DVD with 50 hours of free audiobook content to pass out to your friends and family at Christmas, and I'll roll a few promos for you. We're up to 4,400 registered users over at scottsigler.com. I am now trying to go into the site and send a private message to every one of you who signed up. So if you signed up with a profile at scottsigler.com in the last 3 to 4 weeks, head back there, log in. You should see a little private message icon pop up. Click on that and see what the FDO has to say to you personally. Here's another new thing. I'm going to start throwing some shout-outs to new users on the site, like Bedlam Cat from Fetcham in the UK, Katrina Ulrich from Frederick, Maryland, Gringe, also from the UK, Crothan579, Mecha Girl 33, Joneser012 from Florida, Zombie Chow from Texas. Am I going to see you in Houston or Dallas at the tour stop? Saber Scout from Mableville, Arizona, Ray Quaza 11, Gloria from New York, Neilstoff from Denmark, Jewish, Johnny Fizzle, and Timorous from Australia. It's just such a lovely international flavor to what's going on at scottsigler.com. That's enough chit-chat. Let's get into the rockin' goodness of Nocturnal number 37. And to lead you into it, we've got a story so far from none other than my nemesis, J.C. Hutchins.
Well, hey, everybody, J.C. Hutchins here. You might know me from the Seventh Son podcast novel trilogy and Seventh Son Obsidian. Seventh Son Obsidian has one of the fantastic stories by Mr. Scott Sigler himself in it called You Social Networking. It's about creepy bugs. You ought to check it out. And I'm here to bring you the story so far. Now, as a student of Scott Sigler's shameless self-promotion, I cannot pass up this fantastic opportunity to tell you about Seventh Son Book 1 Descent, coming out in print next fall by St. Martin's Press. And my new supernatural thriller, that's a code word for horror, novel coming out in the summer of 2009 called Personal Effects Dark Art. It's fiction like you've never experienced. Scott Sigler has read it, he loves it, and you will too. Now, speaking of Scott and loving things, I wanted to talk to you guys just for a minute about Contagious. Now, we all know that it's coming out at the end of December, but it's also available for pre-order right now at Scott's website, scottsigler.com/pre-order. Why do you need to know this? Because I have read Contagious, people. I read it a few months ago. It blew me right out of my shoes. It blew my cerebellum to such an extent that my little eyes did become triangle-shaped. It was so fucked up. Listen here, guys. Remember the whole thing that started this? Infected? That was a small screen book. Scott masterfully told a story that took place basically in an apartment. In an apartment! And he got away with it. It was brilliant horror fiction. Now, Contagious is about as a widescreen novel as you can get. This is a $200 million blockbuster waiting to happen, people. It's been a long time since I've read a book that not only scared the living shit out of me, but made my eyes go wide with just the scope and the scale of the story that Scott is telling in Contagious. So many moving parts, so many complex subplots, so much awesome science, lots of horror, lots of triangles, and scary Perry, folks. I dare not say what Scott puts him through in Contagious, but it makes the poor shit that Perry endures in Infected look like a party favor. It is a sequel with no equal. It is on sale right now. scottsigler.com/pre-order. Get your pre-orders in right now. Be one of the first to get Contagious, and be sure to spread the infection. Now, before we get into the story so far, I cannot resist one last thing. Now, as you know, there is a blood feud that stands between Scott Sigler and I, and it's been going on for years. Wars between junkies and beta clones, wars between Siglers and Hutchinses. But I want to make sure that everyone knows that when Scott goes to bed every night, he plays this song and thinks of me.
Did you ever know that you're my hero? And everything I would like to be. I can fly higher than an eagle. You are the wind beneath my wings.
Oh, Scotty Poo, you're just the best. And now it is my great pleasure to present the story so far. Rex the King Depravnichuk is behind everything. He kidnapped the twin daughters of San Francisco Police Chief Amy Zou, forcing Amy to draw two of the city's crime kingpins to a vintage World War II transport ship called the Jeremiah O'Brien. Now the O'Brien, with Zou, her daughters, and the criminal elements on board, is about to sail under the Golden Gate Bridge, headed out to sea. Mafia boss Frank Lanza is one of those criminal elements. He's on board with three of his lieutenants. Weaponless, they are hiding in the shadows of the O'Brien's rear cannon platform. Lanza may be weaponless, but he's got an ace up his sleeve, a Vietnam-era Huey loaded with another lieutenant, Pete the fucking Jew Goldblum, and two heavily armed shooters. The other San Francisco crime kingpin is Russian mobster Dmitri Vasilov, who is waiting below decks with four of his men. Dmitri hired Nick Murray, an ex-Soviet Special Forces officer, to hide in the water outside the boat. With him, Mick has a big bag of weapons and he's just waiting for a signal from Dmitri to deliver the goods. Rex also has plenty of muscle on board. The snake-faced Sly is with him at all times, and the hulking dog-faced Pierre is somewhere on board. Rex has three more soldiers on board. He sends the orangutan-like Devil Dan, a tall drink of water named Lockjaw, and a strange kid known as Dragon Breath out to kill Bryan Clauser. Bryan has just shot out the starboard side running lights of the O'Brien, trying to create a distraction that will let his partner, Pookie Chang, go below decks to search for the twins. They better hurry, because Rex has one more trick up his sleeve. A bomb somewhere in the engine room, planted by Tricky Dick, who is now driving a yacht off the O'Brien's starboard side. And now, episode 37 of Nocturnal.
As the last of the starboard running lights blinked out, that side of the Jeremiah O'Brien fell into thick darkness. Amy Zou crouched. She pressed her back against the wall just to the right of the door leading down into the ballroom hold. Gunshots. She'd checked everyone when they came on board. No one was armed. Everyone, except for Rex's blanket-clad people. Had to be them. This was it. Rex was making his move. That meant he would be coming for the Russians. Rex and his monsters would be coming. The snake face, maybe Pierre, and whatever else had been on the prow gun, curled up under those rotting blankets. She had to move. She had to find another way below decks, into the holds where Tabs and Murr had to be. She couldn't save her girls if she got caught between the Russians and Rex's creatures. The O'Brien's crew, Captain Arturo and his fellow volunteers. She had to save them as well. Correction. She wanted to save them. As awful as she knew it was to think, Arturo and his crew were not the top priority. If they died so that she could save her daughters, that was how it had to be. Her right hand squeezed the handle of the silenced Browning 9mm. Her heart hammered in her chest. She took one long breath, the cold, wet fog sliding deep into her lungs, then stood and moved away from the door. The thing with shooting out the lights was you couldn't see jack shit. Nice strategy, Bryan. He could not believe how fucking dark it was out here. The lights of the Golden Gate Bridge swelled larger and larger, more cut now, more defined through the fog as the O'Brien steamed forward. Before long, those lights would illuminate the deck. For now, however, he could barely see his own black-gloved hands. He looked at Pookie, his best friend. In truth, his only friend. Bryan couldn't imagine the balls Pookie had coming out here. He just couldn't imagine. Pookie looked up and caught Bryan's stare. "Know how I know you're gay?" he said. "How?" "'Cause you look all longingly into my eyes before you go off to be all psycho and shit." Bryan nodded. "Get it done, Pooks. I know they saw me shoot out the lights. They're coming, so haul balls." Pookie nodded in return, then slid past Bryan, moving forward with great care so as not to slip on the slick metal deck. Bryan watched Pookie move past the front of the forward lifeboat. Then he lay flat, swinging his legs over the side and slipping down the 10 feet to the main deck, out of sight. Pooks could still move pretty good for a guy carrying 20 pounds too much. Bryan had to draw them, whoever them might be, away from anywhere Pookie might go. Since Pookie was going down into the holds below decks, Bryan decided to go up. He crouched, feeling that strength in his legs, the ridiculous power in each thigh. Had this strength always been there? 3 weeks ago, if he'd known it was possible, could he have jumped 2 fucking stories high? He couldn't answer that, and it didn't really matter what he could do 3 weeks ago, because he could do it now. Bryan jumped. Such a strange sensation, like the first time on a leg press machine, putting on 50 pounds and thinking that's a lot, and pushing as hard as you can, and the weights fly up and smash into the pulley because you can actually press something like 300 pounds. That's what it felt like he weighed almost nothing at all. He sailed over the lifeboat, arced through the air, and landed at the very top of the ship. The momentum made him stumble a bit when he landed, but a player could get used to this shit and real fast. He crouched next to the big smokestack that stuck out of the square roof center. Circular, concrete machine gun nests dotted each corner, chest-high walls making the roof look like the keep of an ancient castle. Up here, Bryan could see the front and back of the ship. But more importantly, anyone in the front or back of the ship could see him. He didn't know how long he could hold out. Hopefully, long enough for Pookie to find the girls and get them off the ship. And what about the girl's mother? What about Amy Zou? Bryan would get the chief if he could, but she was a big girl. She could take care of herself. His first priority was the twins. He shook his head. That sounded noble as hell, sounded like a screenwriter had penned it. And it was pure bullshit. His first priority was to kill. Kill Firstborn. Kill Rex. Kill them all. That was his life now, because Bryan Clauser was the savior. Devil Dan, Dragon Breath, and Lockjaw moved silently across the main deck, hugging the inside of the starboard rail. Dan had seen a shadow of a man jumping from the lifeboat deck up to the very top of the ship, on top of the bridge or whatever it was. Such a jump, at least 20 feet from the lifeboat deck to the top. That was no human. Only family could do shit like that. But the king wanted the man dead. And that, as Snoop Dogg would say, was motherfucking that. Just as Dan bent to jump after the man, he noticed a flicker of light from a door on his right, the door that led down to the gift shop and the ballroom. Someone was coming up those stairs. Dan pointed a knobby finger at Lockjaw, then pointed at the doorway, slid the knobby finger across his own throat, then pointed up to the top deck. Lockjaw just stood there. Nodding was a real pain in the ass for him, so he didn't do it, but he got the message just the same. Dan pointed at Dragon Breath, then pointed to the top of the ship. Dragon Breath rolled his eyes, but nodded. The little guy couldn't jump for shit, so he'd have to climb up. Devil Dan bent and sprang 10 feet up to land lightly on the lifeboat deck. From there, he'd listen for a second to make sure he wasn't missing anything. Then he would hop up to the top deck, just as the man had. And then he would take out that retard with the stupid skull drawing on his face.
Boss!
Oleg shouted down the steps.
Police bitch! She's gone!
Dmitri nodded. Patience was its own reward. Now the opportunities were really starting to play out.
Mush me, let's go,
he said. He stood and walked to the steep metal stairs leading up to the main deck. Sviatoslav, Arseny, and Vyatchik followed, all three moving with aggressive strides. Dmitri reached the bottom step and started up. From the top, just inside the main deck door, Oleg looked down, smiled, then turned to walk out. Dmitri saw something strange flash in, something thin and flesh-colored, that grabbed Oleg and yanked him out of the doorway. Dmitri froze in place, holding a palm behind him. The three men following him froze as well. A pause of 2 seconds. Then Oleg appeared in the doorway again, screaming, a blur of a man being slammed into the metal doorway's thin edge. On impact, Dmitri heard a groan, a crunching sound, and the hollow ringing of the ship's metal walls. Just as fast, Oleg vanished from sight again. Something had been holding him, something thin that Dmitri couldn't make out. A pause of a half-second this time, then again, Oleg slamming into the door's edge with another, more wet-sounding crunch. Again, the ship rang like a gong when his body hit home, and he wasn't screaming anymore. Oleg vanished one more time, only briefly, then flew through the door and into the stairwell. His head smashed into the gray metal wall, splattering blood on the steps and leaving a long, curved red smear. The limp, broken body landed halfway down the stairs, then flop-rolled the rest of the way to fall at Dmitri's feet. Dmitri remained frozen, palm back. Oleg's brutal demise had lasted all of 3 seconds. Up at the top of the stairs, Dmitri saw something move past the door, moving left to right, from the front of the ship to the back. A flash of orange and black, and then nothing. He looked down at Oleg from Los Angeles. Head smashed in, right eye gone, bloody left eye still wide-eyed in a look of shock and fear. Whatever had killed him had thrown him around like an angry teenager swinging a cat by its tail. And whatever had done it was still up there. Still up there, where Dmitri had to go. He should have felt fear. He knew that. But instead, he felt a rush of adrenaline so hard his body shivered as if from an intense orgasm. That's what he always felt like when he went to war. He brought his hand up to shoulder level, then waved it forward, signaling his men to follow. He stepped over Oleg and silently started up the blood-splattered stairs. He reached the top and looked out into the pitch darkness of the ship's starboard side. He saw no movement. Oleg's killer was out there in the darkness, and Dmitri wasn't about to walk through pitch black and stumble into it. He put a palm back again, then slid out of the door, careful not to touch the blood-slick edge. He turned left, towards the front of the boat. He could see some illumination filtering across from the port side running lights, which were still on. They would go left, cross the deck, then left again, and head for the rear of the ship. He waved the men out, then led the way, moving very slowly. The black Dodge Magnum barreled down Franklin Street, swerving around the few cars still left on the road. The red and blue lights of a San Francisco police cruiser flashed behind them, accompanied by screeching sirens.
Honestly, Adam,
Alder Jessup shouted to the front.
Can't you lose him? This isn't a fucking cop show, Grandpa,
Adam shouted back.
We're not on the highway here, yo. I can't just outrun him.
Silence, Jebediah Erickson hissed.
Adam, get us to the water. Alder, please focus on my leg.
Alder was kneeling on the floor in the Magnum's modified back seat, between the two captain's chairs. Jebediah sat in the left captain's chair, his right pants leg rolled up past his knee. Alder looked up at him.
Are you sure you want to do this?
Jebediah nodded. He was sure. He'd do anything for a chance to fight Firstborn, even if that meant crawling to war with no legs at all.
Do it.
Alder paused for a moment, then put a thin, flat metal strip against the outside of Jebediah's naked inner right shin. Alder raised a drill that already held a half-inch screw on top of the magnetic bit. He placed the point of the screw through a hole in the metal strip centered just under the knee, raised the drill level, then pressed the trigger. The machine whirred briefly, with a sound reminiscent of the drills used to remove lug nuts on a race car's tires. The surgical screw bit instantly, passing through skin to sink into the tibia and press the metal strip firm against the bone. Jebediah screamed. He couldn't help it, but he cut it off instantly. Alder quickly put a second screw on the magnetic bit, then centered that screw on a hole at the strip's bottom, right above the ankle. Just as he pulled the trigger, Adam swerved hard right. The strip slid a bit, and the drill drove the spinning screw across the front of Jebediah's shin. Blood spilled down his foot.
Adam,
Alder screamed.
Keep the damn car steady. You told me to lose him, yo. Make up your mind already, B. Just put in the goddamn screw, Jebediah said. I can't fight with this leg flopping around.
Alder quickly recentered the hole at the bottom of the strip, held it tight, then pulled the trigger. The screw dug deep into the bone. This time, Jebediah was prepared and bit back the scream. They had no choice but to try this ad hoc surgical support. Just 20 minutes or so earlier, his leg had been cockeyed outward, courtesy of a 3-story fall while handcuffed to a hospital bed. To fix it, Alder held the leg while Adam whacked it with a sledgehammer, re-breaking the bones, which Alder then expertly reset. It would heal, but not soon enough to support Jebediah when it came time to move, to fight. Hopefully, this metal strip would keep things in place, allow him to move while the bones continued to heal.
We're coming up on Bay Street,
Adam called back, shouting to be heard over the screeching cop siren.
Head for Pier 45, yo!
Jebediah was about to say yes when he looked out the windshield. Franklin Street was a steep hill leading down to Fort Mason and the bay beyond. Buildings rose up on either side, cutting off the view left or right, but straight down the street, you could see all the way out across the water to Angel Island and Tiburon. And in that span of water, Jebediah saw a long shape, Portside lights small, glowing pearls in the dense fog. The Jeremiah O'Brien was headed out to sea. He was too late.
"Adam," he said, "what weapons do you have in this vehicle?" "All the standard backup stuff," he said. "Your knives, bow, 50 arrows, 2 5.7s, the shotgun, 2 flash grenades, 2 shrapnel grenades, spring-loaded wrist knife." "And equipment?" You know, the usual, yo. Cloak repair kit, med kit, stuff like that." "And rope?" "Sure, maybe a couple 100 feet, yo."
Jebediah nodded. He was down to his last option, and it wasn't good.
"Left on Bay," Jebediah said. "Then west on Marina Boulevard."
The Magnum turned hard to the right as Adam expertly put the station wagon into a power slide. The wheels screeched, then caught, and the long black car shot down Bay Street.
"Close it all up, Alder," Jebediah said. "Get my weapons. It's time to prepare for battle."
Chief Amy Zou hid under a bench, completely hidden in the darkness enshrouding the starboard side. She'd heard a man scream, then 3 horrible, banging noises that sent small vibrations echoing through the ship. Her breath came in short gasps. She fought to control it. She'd been in firefights before, goddammit. Movement to her left. She held her breath. She could only see feet. Feet and dragging blankets, barely visible in the gloom. One looked dark blue or dark green, she couldn't tell. The other was black and an orange so bright it stood out even in the foggy darkness. Whoever they were, whatever they were moving to the rear of the ship, moving by without even noticing her. She feared for her life like never before, but another fear, more powerful and far deeper, was the fear for her daughters' lives. She waited for a few seconds, then forced herself out of hiding. Time was running out. She had to get below and find her girls. Pookie slipped through the aft cabin door and into the superstructure. No one in the narrow halls. The stairs to the engine room were just a right-hand turn away. He made that turn, then descended, remembering the night he'd tapped Gretchen Howell. Down in the engine room, of all things. It was a sprawling place, like some steampunk version of an H.R. Geiger alien nest, all moving brass parts and noise and spinning wheels and steam. Despite having knocked back at least a half bottle of Tuaca, he'd let her down into the engine room like a silent sexual ninja looking for a place to do an assassination. An ass assassination. Ha, he'd have to remember that one. He lifted the shotgun barrel and donked himself in the forehead. Pain flared up, pain he deserved. His life was on the line, as were the lives of the girls and Bryan and Chief Zou. This wasn't the time to be thinking of good one-liners to file away. He descended the steep hybrid of a ladder and stairs, with narrow great strips for steps. There was a rail polished by decades of hands, but Pookie kept both of his hands firmly clenched on his USAS-12, the 12-gauge semi-automatic shotgun. Right about now, that kind of firepower was all the balance and security that he wanted. He'd led Gretchen down the ladders into the engine room, bumping his New Year's Eve party hat on the low-hanging door frames. Everything was stamped steel and gray paint, dotted with little rust bubbles. He'd remembered going down into the engine room, being quiet, which was ridiculous, since the goddamn place was about as silent as a fireworks finale. Couple of crew guys had been down there, but they'd been so busy, Pookie and Gretchen hadn't been noticed. 3 steep sets of ladder steps, interspersed with 2 small metal grate landings, and he'd been on the engine room's bottom level. And then, what was it? He'd turned towards the back of the boat. Oh, that's right. He'd thought it hysterical at the time. He'd found a little room called the thrust recess room. Fucking big-ass spinning shaft in there, probably drove the propeller or whatever. He and Gretchen had got their swerve on, but the place stuck in Pookie's head for another reason. At the back of this little, greasy, dark, rusty room was another door labeled Hold Number 4. Once again, Pookie's feet touched down on the engine room floor, some 40 feet below the main deck. Rust and steam and brass and blistered paint. So much motion, just like last time. And, like before, there were 2 crew members. But they weren't busy. They stared right at him. 2 old men, crouched behind one of the boilers, one holding a big red crescent wrench, the other holding a short knife. They were both scared, but Pookie could see this wasn't the first time they'd heard gunshots. Veterans.
Who the hell are you? One of the old men said. Basil Rathborn?
That depends, Pookie said.
On what?
The man said.
On who the fuck is Basil Rathborn? Robin Hood, you idiot,
the old man said.
Are you gonna shoot us?
Pookie shook his head.
Not now. Hey, you guys seen any little girls down here?
Both men shook their heads.
How about, big fuckers wearing blankets?
The 2 men looked at each other, then back at Pookie.
Yep,
the man said.
Hold number 5, I think. How do I get there?
The old man pointed to the thrust recess room.
That's the fastest way. Go through hold number 4. Dark as a nun's cooter in there, but on the other side there's a small access door to hold number 5.
Pookie nodded thanks, then turned towards the thrust recess room. Back behind the spinning wheels and pumping brass, something caught his eye. A bit of blinking red. Digital red. He hadn't seen blinking red the last time he'd been down here. There was no digital red down here, because the O'Brien predated the digital age by about 2 decades. It was the blinking digital red of a clock. A clock or a timer. Fuck. He searched for the blinking red, the shotgun stock at his hip, the barrel pointing forward. There, through 3 waist-thick pistons of gleaming, blurring brass. A clock. He leaned in as close as he could without having his face or an arm taken off by the huge rust-blistered wheels. A clock. Mounted on top of grayish blocks, stenciled with 1 letter and 1 number. C4. Pookie's stomach churned and his legs felt weak. A motherfucking time bomb. Wires everywhere, way more wires than just the ones that would set off the C4. Booby-trapped? If he pulled on any of the wires, would it just go off? Like he knew how to disarm a goddamn bomb, like now he was fucking MacGyver or something. He had to get the hell out of there. The clock ticked down from 5:01 to 5:00, then 4:59. No. He had to find the girls. They were down here, and if he didn't get them out, they'd die. He turned back to face the 2 old men.
Either of you happen to know how to disarm a bomb? Why?
The old man said.
Do I look like MacGyver?
Pookie pointed his index finger straight up.
You better take your chances in the water, gents. If you see any of your boys on the way up, tell them to abandon ship. The lifeboats are fucked. Good luck.
As the clock ticked down to 4:46, Pookie Chang turned and ran to the small, rusty door of hold number 4. Bryan didn't hear it, except maybe for the soft rustling of fabric flapping in the wind. And he didn't see it, except maybe for a brief shadow silhouetted by the shrinking city lights of San Francisco. Something dark arced up onto the concrete roof to join him. He didn't really have to see it or hear it, because deep in his chest, he felt it. Bryan didn't think. He just moved, diving into one of the circular machine gun bunkers. Automatic fire stuttered behind him, followed simultaneously by the whines and whirs of lead rounds dancing off concrete walls. Bryan still didn't know his own strength. He overshot the center of the nest, smashing face first into the inside concrete wall. Just a foot higher, he'd have missed it completely and fell 60 feet into the bay. He sat on his knees, trying to recover, blood pouring down his face from a cut over his left eyebrow. The gunfire paused, just for a second, and Bryan heard that rustling again. He turned fast to sit on his ass, back against the wall, raised his 5.7s, and started firing before his eyes locked onto the big shape flying towards him. He was firing wide left. Bryan corrected his aim, moving the guns without pausing on the tip-tap of the triggers, tracing a path to the target like the disabled machine gun in this very nest must have once done against attacking Nazi dive bombers. Just as Bryan started shooting on target, the arcing, dark shape fired again, blinding Bryan with close-range muzzle flashes. Something hit him in the forehead, snapping his skull back so fast it smashed into the concrete wall again. Blackness spread across his vision, not the darkness of night, but the blurry haze of near unconsciousness. He heard his attacker land hard, accompanied by a grunt and a snarl of pissed-off pain. He also heard another noise, a noise like the beauty of a symphonic finale. The clattering of a weapon sliding across the concrete, then bouncing off his right foot to smack against the inside of the nest wall. The attacker had dropped its weapon. Bryan shook his head to clear it and instantly regretted the move. More blackness. He had to get up, start shooting. He blinked madly, feeling like his soul was dunked in tar, tried to get his bearings. But his bearings came to him. A muscled shoulder smashed into his mouth, driving his head into the concrete wall yet again. Flashes now joined the darkness inside his eyes, a combo black hole and strobe light effect. The smell of rotten cloth and wet fur. Still sitting on his ass, back against the rough wall, two cold, hairy hands locked on his throat and squeezed hard. Bryan Clauser opened his eyes to a nightmare. A monkeyish face, irregular patches of fur sticking out, bare, spotted skin, and snarling eyes. Bryan reached up with both hands and grabbed the creature's left wrist. With his ass on the ground acting as a fulcrum, Bryan kicked his right leg high, around the outside of the attacking creature's left arm. Bryan slid his back down the wall, dropping his left shoulder to the deck, his right shoulder pointing up as his right foot passed across the creature's chest. The sudden move made the creature pull back in surprise, but Bryan kept his hands locked on its left wrist. The pullback created a little space between them, just enough for Bryan to slide his left leg inside, in front of the monster's stomach. The move pinched the attacker's upper arm between Bryan's thighs and positioned the elbow just above Bryan's crotch. Bryan, the Ninja Clauser, held the monster's wrist tight to his throat as he arched his back, extended his legs, and thrust his hips forward. The attacker's arm bent backwards against the joint. It held for just a second before snapping the wrong way. The thing screamed in pain and fury, sounded like a howler monkey being shot. With the upper arm still pinched between his knees, Bryan reefed the wrist to the right, then to the left, grinding the broken bones inside the creature's skin. Then he felt a powerful hand on his right ankle, and before he could react, the creature's free hand lifted the ankle to its mouth and it bit down. Pain exploded as fangs drove through his black jeans and boots and sank into his flesh and bones. Now it was Bryan's turn to scream in agony, and scream he did. Rational thoughts fled from the waves of pain. He reactively jerked on the shattered arm again, then threw his left hand down to brace himself on the concrete deck. His left palm landed on something small, squarish, and hard. The attacker's weapon. Bryan blindly grabbed the boxy gun, his hands telling him it was an Uzi, his fingers finding the handle, finding the trigger. He pointed the weapon along the outside of his left thigh, then squeezed the trigger with desperate, pain-fueled strength and held it down until the hammer rattled on empty. The pain on his ankle eased up. Jaws released. The nasty, smelly creature fell to its back, chest heaving in irregular gasps. Ravaged left arm pointed out at a funny angle, thanks to a jagged green stick elbow break. Bryan dropped the Uzi and scooched his back to the inside of the curved concrete wall, one hand holding his ankle, the other blindly feeling for one of his 5.7s. He found it and clutched it like a holy relic. Something passed in front of the lights of far-off San Francisco. Bryan looked up. 5 feet away, just on the other side of the machine gun nest wall, a nerdy Mexican kid with a huge, distended stomach. The kid wore bent, horn-rimmed glasses and was draped in a nasty blue blanket. The kid held a silver Zippo in his right hand. In a practice motion that would have made the most hardcore hipster chainsmoker green with envy, the kid brought his left hand across, flipping open the Zippo and lighting it with the same motion. The kid's cheeks puffed out, like he was about to puke. His stomach made a gurgling noise that Bryan heard even over the sound of the O'Brien's engines. The kid held up the Zippo and let out a world record frat boy belch. Flames billowed out, a spreading fireball ripping towards Bryan's face. As the heat washed over him, he simply reacted, pushing down hard with his left foot, launching himself over the curved wall towards the churning water 60 feet below. Dmitri Vasilov felt so alive, which he knew was kind of strange, as death was about to blossom into full bloom. Oleg gone. Very soon, Dmitri would have weapons, and the Italians would join Oleg. Dmitri just hoped he'd have the chance to take out Lanza himself. He walked along the portside rail, the lifeboat deck above him, the central superstructure to his left, the water beyond the rail to his right. Another 15 feet in this delightful cover, and then the open deck that led to the rear cannon platform. A flash of burning motion on his right side made him flinch and duck so fast he slammed into the superstructure wall on his left. Then a cry of pain and the smell of singed fabric. A gloved hand holding onto the rail, the glove burning, the coat beyond smoldering with thin, rising smoke. Dmitri recovered, then leaned towards the rail and peeked over. A man dressed in a black peacoat, hanging on the metal rail by his right hand, body and feet swinging 30 feet above the churning water. The man looked up. A black skullcap and a black mask, both also smoldering. Narrow eye slits looking hollow in the low light. A white, childish skull smile scrawled across the mouth. And then, a brief flash of chrome. A gun in the man's left hand. "Move!" Dmitri shouted as he ducked back behind the rail and sprinted towards the rear of the boat. Shots rang out as the masked man fired into the walkway's metal roof, bullets ricocheting off and bouncing wild. Dmitri heard Vyachik cry out, but he didn't have time to look back. That walkway was hard steel on two sides and concrete beneath. No telling which way the bullets might bounce. Dmitri sprinted out of the walkway and onto the open rear deck. He stayed low, hugging the inside of the port rail as he headed for the gun platform, hoping his men could keep up. Pookie wished he'd brought a flashlight. The empty hold number 4 seemed cavernous, 50 feet wide, maybe 70 feet long. A few lights 45 feet up above cast dim illumination down onto the rusty floor. He stepped through thin puddles of stagnant water. A bit disconcerting at first, until he realized the water came from plinking, dripping condensation, and not a leak. Besides, he had more important things to worry about, like the ticking bomb back in the engine room. 4 minutes left. This was insane. Just fucking insane. He could die down here, die in the blast, or even worse, drown slowly as water flooded into the bottom of the ship. He wanted to run, to go back up those steep steps, get to the deck and just jump the fuck off, because he didn't have much time to live. Only a few minutes. He donked himself in the forehead again with the shotgun barrel. Pain rang through his skull, dull and intense on his forehead, radiating and dissipating as it spread. He didn't have time to be a coward. Those girls would die for sure if he didn't get to them. At the end of the hold, a small, watertight access door. Black plastic squares with indented, stained white letters read, "Hold number 5." Pookie took a deep breath, then pulled the handle. Any hope of a silent entry vanished. The handle screeched with a sharp, rusty metal complaint that echoed through the cave-like hold. Anything on the other side of that door knew he was coming. But he couldn't turn back now. Didn't have time to turn back now. Pookie pushed on the door. It swung inward, rusty hinges adding another round of echoing screeches. Pookie Chang had never been this terrified. And when the door opened to yet another dimly lit hold,
When he saw what waited 20 feet past the door, his balls wanted to crawl up inside his chest as terror pulsed to a new plateau. Pookie Chang swallowed hard, clutched his automatic shotgun with white-knuckled hands, and stepped through. All kinds of gunfire, and some kind of fucking fireball up on the top of the bridge. Frank Lanza had never, ever wanted a gun in his hand worse than now. He and little Tommy Cosimo stayed crouched around the base of the rear cannon. They were 10 or 15 feet above the main deck, which gave them a commanding view back to the ship's center, to the big superstructure that rose 30 feet into the air. Polly the Hatchet hid inside a curved, concrete anti-aircraft gun mount to the left, and Gutless Capistrano was in an identical one to the right. Deep shadows completely hid both men.
"Hey, Frank,"
said little Tommy Cosimo.
"when the fuck is that helicopter getting here?"
Frank tried to look past the superstructure, towards the bridge, close enough now that it looked like the gargantuan construct that it was. The O'Brien was very close to passing under it. Maybe another 3 minutes? And even closer than the bridge, a moving shadow. The Huey. 30 seconds away, maybe a minute.
"Beat's almost here," Frank said. "Just stay quiet, and this bullshit'll be over soon."
Tommy opened his mouth to speak, then closed it.
"What is it?"
Frank asked.
"Well, I'm just looking at this ship, boss, and I'm wondering, where's Pete gonna land?"
Frank Lanza looked out at the boat, as if seeing it for the first time. It had been a simple plan. Helicopter comes out, strafes the deck with machine gun fire. Lands, he got on, helicopter leaves. The O'Brien was huge, plenty of room to land if there was an open space. But from this vantage point, he could see there wasn't an open space. Plenty of deck room, sure, but 3 cranes and 1 smokestack rose high above the main deck, at least 30 feet above it. And running from the deck to each crane, and from crane top to smokestack to crane top, steel cables. There was no place for the Huey to land, not unless Frank could get those cables unhooked, or if the Huey could lower a ladder. That would work, actually. He looked around the cannon platform. No cables here. No place to land either, but plenty of space for the Huey to hover, lower down a ladder, and for him to climb up. This was a major flaw in his plan, granted, but it wasn't a disaster. Not if he kept his cool, if he kept his head.
"Hey,"
Tommy said.
"who are those guys on the left?"
Frank looked. 3 men crouched and sprinting down the ship's port side, hugging the inside of the rail. A 4th man lagged behind, limping. The lead man moved under a running light, which lit up his face for a brief second. Dmitri Vasilov. Down on the main deck, coming this way. If Vasilov came up the ladder to the gun platform, it would turn into a fistfight between the Italians and the Russians. Frank Lanza had a chopper full of shooters coming in. He did not want it to go hand to hand before that happened.
"Everyone stay the fuck down and stay quiet,"
Frank hissed. He crouched down even lower, hugging the deck, wishing the shadows to deepen and darken, and he waited. Brian's right shoulder was out of the socket for sure. The pain wasn't that bad compared to the formerly broken left collarbone, but it sure as fuck didn't feel good. Not with shoulder muscle and ligaments holding all of his weight. The real problem, of course, was his flaming right glove. And that pain was definitely bad. He slid the left-hand 5.7 behind his back, feeling it slip inside the peacoat and lock into its holster. He swung his left hand up to grab the rail, then pulled himself over the rail and into the walkway where Dmitri Vasilov and his men had just stood. Bryan ripped off the right glove, tossing it overboard like a flaccid, flaming miniature comet. His right hand screamed pain all the way up to his shoulder, which itself screamed back. His right ankle voiced complaints of its own, all 3 of them, fighting for Bryan's attention like spoiled little children. Apparently, his coat was fireproof in addition to being bulletproof, What the hell was that kid? Goddamn Mexican Harry Potter pyro, lighting his goddamn burps? This insanity would never cease. Bryan's true calling in life was to hunt down creatures like that, hunt them down and take them out. He'd never dislocated his shoulder before. Fuck, did it hurt. He had to reset it, or he was screwed. He'd seen a movie like that once, some buddy cop flick. Guy had just smashed it into a wall and driven it back into place. Bryan took a quick, deep breath, trying to ignore the pain in his right hand and his ankle, trying to focus on the pain in his shoulder. Then he drove the shoulder into the metal wall. Something popped back into place, and there was actually a split second of relief before a new wave of agony exploded through his arm. Good God, did that hurt! He bit back a scream, then leaned away from the wall and rotated his right arm. It moved. It hurt like fuck, but it rotated. He could still fight. Might as well move to the rear of the boat, follow the Russians, see what noise he could make back there. As long as he got out of these confined spaces, got into the open so he could see that Mexican kid coming. Bryan ejected the magazine from his one remaining 5.7 and put the magazine in his side pocket, then popped a fresh one home. He'd have to shoot left-handed. His scorched right hand just hurt too bad. That was ironic, because just a few hours ago, he couldn't even move his left arm. Now, in comparison to his right, the left arm felt good as new. Bryan ran along the port rail to the edge of the roof covering above. It was brighter than the starboard side, and he had to fix that. He raised his 5.7 and fired 4 shots. 2 hits, 2 misses, taking out another couple of running lights. The rear of the Jeremiah O'Brien fell into total darkness, but long patches of growing light between deep shadows were already forming thanks to the approaching illumination of the Golden Gate Bridge. Bryan stepped out of the walkway's cover and onto the open deck. He started to run, but felt a crushing, vice-like grip on his chest as something grabbed him from behind and lifted him high into the air. Down on the surface of the water, Nick Murray couldn't see what was happening up on the O'Brien's deck. Many missions' worth of experience, however, let him piece some things together. Small flashes of light playing off the water meant small arms fire. He'd actually seen part of the fireball that billowed off the port side. Either a flamethrower or a small explosion, maybe in the bridge. There was some serious action going on up there. And to top it off, a blacked-out helicopter coming in low. Blacked out, sure, but he could still spot the outline clear as day against the bridge's lights. A Huey. Old-time American war helicopter. And that was no coincidence. Gunfire up on the boat, a Huey coming in fast and low. Things were getting interesting. The Huey clearly belonged to someone other than Dmitri. Otherwise, Dmitri wouldn't have hired Nick to hang out at the back of this old transport ship, waiting for a signal so he could send up a big bag of weapons. Nick had clamped powerful magnets onto the starboard hull just past the rudder. The ship slid through the water, which made the wake pull hard on his body, but he was securely tied off to the magnets. The O'Brien casually dragged him along. Almost on his back, just his head above water, Nick stared up at the rail above. He also kept an eye on the white yacht that was keeping pace just off the starboard side, a ghostly vision through the thick fog. Nick kept a close eye because the yacht wasn't that far off. Some bad piloting, and it might slam right up against the O'Brien, might even slam into his position, squashing him between the two vessels like a grape pinched between a strong man's thumb and finger. Then finally, he saw it. A small light up above. Then another. Tiny from 30 feet away, hard to see in the fog, but the light stood out well enough. 2 lighters. The signal. Nick quickly checked his lines. The weapons bag was also locked onto the ship via the portable magnets. He checked the rope that tied him to the bag, a loose rope with 40 feet of length, enough to reach from the rail down to the water. Nick grabbed one of the 2 magnets that secured him to the boat. Each had a pistol-style handle with a trigger. He held them both, then pulled the right-hand trigger. The magnet released. He swung it up high, then released the trigger just as it reconnected with the hull. The powerful magnet stuck fast.
Then he squeezed the left-hand trigger, releasing that magnet, pulled himself up as high as he could with his right arm, and swung his left hand high and stuck that magnet to the hull. Now clear of the water, Nick crawled up the side of the O'Brien, hand over hand, the rope tied to the bag of weapons trailing along behind him. Pookie Chang was not a tough guy. Now, he was no pussy either, mind you. He was a cop, a detective, and he'd laid out more ass whippings in his patrol days than he could remember. But he wasn't that big, wasn't that strong, and wasn't that fast. What had got him through 10 years of patrol and moved him into detective was his brain. Pookie Chang was smarter than the average bear. Looking at what stood before him, that was a good thing, because even if he had been big, strong, and fast, it wouldn't have made a fuck stain's worth of difference. Bryan's werewolf. For fucking real. Bryan's dream werewolf. Pookie heard his own heart in his ears, beating fast like a death metal double pedal. He saw everything, took it all in like the world moved in slow motion. In a fraction of a second, the entire scene seared into his memory like a permanent granite sculpture. 6'10", at least, with a dog-like face. Crazy, cockeyed, long lower jaw skewed off to the right, so that its foot-long tongue drops straight down. Both jaws, the cockeyed bottom and the straight-out top, lined with big fucking teeth, the kind that would make Jaws say, "Hey, you really got some big fucking teeth." It wore a black tuxedo coat, silky and shiny, reflecting the hold's lights from 40 feet above. Under the tuxedo coat, a bulletproof vest, and beyond that, diarrhea brown fur. And in its toaster-sized, furred right hand, a sawed-off shotgun pointing at the back of little Merzo's head. Mur and Tabs knelt on the rusty wet metal floor. They were both shivering, cold water seeping up into their jeans. Mur's left eye burned with pure hate. Pookie couldn't see her right eye because it was swollen shut. The left corner of her lips showed a nasty green bruise visible even in the dimness. Mur had a mouth on her, and apparently this thing didn't approve of her attitude. While Mur still radiated defiance, Tabs's eyes showed nothing at all. The girl's slack eyelids barely hid a long stare into blankness. A thin strand of drool dropped from the monster's tongue, swung like a pendulum, catching the dim lights like a cave icicle channeling late afternoon sun. The strand broke, then dropped. Something about that strand of spit, Pookie would never know what, something about it brought home the reality of the situation, made time slip back into normal speed. In that strange, spit-demarcated moment, Pookie Chang knew he was going to die. The massive creature saw Pookie and it took a step back. It took a step back. The shotgun barrel remained pointed at the back of Mur's head, but the creature's big black eyes looked afraid. And then it hit him. The cloak. This thing thought that Pookie was Jebediah, the savior. Pookie suddenly thought how it must look to the creature. The cloak swirling as he moved, no face visible in the hood's deep shadow. Pookie Chang had just been mistaken for this nightmare's worst nightmare. The mental bomb clock kept ticking in the back of his head. 2 minutes? Less? He had to move now, or none of this mattered. He put his shotgun to his shoulder and leveled the barrel at the monster.
"Drop it,"
Pookie said, in his best Jebediah impression.
"All I want are the girls."
The dog face hesitated, then dropped the sawed-off. It clattered against the wet, rusty floor.
"Mur," Pookie said, "get your sister. Let's go."
Bryan Clauser's face smashed through a steel smokestack, and his body followed. Jagged shards of metal tore the skin on both hands. One razorish bit slid under his face mask, gashing through the skin so deep he felt it scrape against his right cheekbone.
Too fast, too disorienting. That something grabbing his chest and lifting him and whipping him towards the superstructure, then through the steel smokestack. He hadn't felt himself let go of the 5.7, but now both hands were empty. The grip on his chest released. Bryan tried to get his bearings, tried to stand and face his attacker, but managed only to turn to his left before the unknown force crushed his chest with that heart attack strength and yanked him away from the superstructure, back into the foggy night air. Blood poured down his cheek, down his neck, to soak into the shirt he wore under the peacoat. His back was now to the Golden Gate, but they had to be very close, because he saw his attacker lit up with spotlight intensity. Impossible. Impossible. A lower jaw, 10 feet long and split in the middle like the mandibles of an ant, the ends of which locked around his chest. Stubble stuck out along the jaw, as normal as a pub crawler back from an all-night drunken stint on the town. A thick, fleshy upper lip, normal nose, and normal eyes. The tall, lanky creature wore an orange and black flag draped over his shoulders. Tall, like 6'8" at least, and Bryan had a crazy flash thought that if he could recruit a bunch of Nocturnals for a hoops team, he could win an NBA championship in 3 years or less, as long as he got LeBron to sign in free agency. The creature stood at the back edge of the portside lifeboat deck. It had plucked Bryan off the main deck 10 feet below, then smashed him into the smokestack. The long, thin lower jaws held Bryan effortlessly, which left the monster's hands free to aim a thick, lethal-looking .44 automag. All of it happening so fast, so instantly. Movement from up above, at the top of the ship, in the rear portside concrete machine gun bunker that Bryan had leapt from just moments ago. There stood the Mexican kid who had the killer Zippo trick. The long-jawed thing held the automag in an overhand grip, gangsta style, which would have looked ridiculous, but Bryan instantly saw the reason. It lined the barrel of the gun along the top of its long lower jaw so that it could shoot Bryan, but not risk hitting its own pincers. Bryan saw the Mexican kid hop over the curved concrete crenellation, dropping down to land next to the ant face, just as the ant face started firing. Bryan threw his forearms in front of his face. .44 caliber bullets pulverized his forearms. They didn't penetrate, thanks to the coat's high-tech armor, but he felt kinetic energy pound his left forearm, and he felt his right ulna snap in 2 places. His left hand slid into the sleeve slot on his broken right forearm and gripped the handle of his 10-inch ceramic knife. The automag kept firing, and if he pulled his arm away and one of those bullets hit him in the face, it was all over. Another bullet took him in the right elbow. He felt the joint shatter and splinter, like he had been hit with a well-aimed hammer blow delivered by Thor himself. He had to move, or the bullets would simply beat him to death. Bryan closed his eyes, then pulled the knife free, extended his left hand, and slashed down with all his remaining strength. He felt a momentary resistance, and then nothing. The pressure in his chest released, and he dropped hard to the bloody deck below. A strange scream made him open his eyes and look up. The mandibled man stumbled at the edge of the lifeboat deck, the left jaw pincer still stretching out a good 10 feet. The right pincer was 2 feet shorter and spurting blood into the night. The thing reared its head, blood arcing even higher. Then it fell back out of sight beyond the edge of the lifeboat deck, which left the Mexican kid just 10 feet away and 10 feet up. Bryan saw the kid's fast hands move for the Zippo trick. Fuck you, S.A., Bryan thought. Still holding the ceramic knife in his left hand, he pointed his left arm straight at the kid as he bent his hand down at the wrist. A silver dust-coated blade shot out, closing the distance in the blink of an eye. Just as the kid's hand crossed over the Zippo and the flame danced to life, the blade sliced through the boy's bloated belly. He dipped inward at the waist, like he'd been punched, shock and surprise etched behind his bent wire-rimmed glasses. A stream of thin, visible, white vapor jetted out of the fresh hole. Bryan and the kid seemed to see it at the same time, see the expanding cone of jetting vapor billowing towards the lit Zippo. The flame caught the vapor. It shot back into the boy's bloated stomach like a reverse flamethrower a split second before he exploded in a bloody fireball that launched bits of flesh all over the lifeboat deck.
A smoldering shoe hit the deck next to Bryan. New Balance. Bryan stumbled to his feet, favoring his right ankle. He put the knife back in his hidden forearm sheath, the single motion making his right arm light up with pain. Burnt hand, broken forearm, shattered right elbow. He needed time to heal, time for Alder Jessup to reset his bones or staple him, whatever. But time was something he did not have. Bryan turned to face the front of the O'Brien. Even with the horrific situation and the pain coursing through his body, the view took his breath away. The Golden Gate Bridge rose majestically before him, support towers reaching up impossibly high, lights glowing softly through the fog. The bridge was big, sure, but he'd never seen it from the water, and never at night. Epic in scale, it took on the dimensions of an alien artifact from some big-budget sci-fi movie. But what was that? A shadow, a big shape, coming in low. A helicopter?
You killed my people!
A voice, small but strong, from up high and behind. Bryan turned and looked up 30 feet to the gun turret where the Mexican kid had stood scant seconds ago. There were two people up there. The snake face from his dreams, from the hospital, dressed in an immaculate three-piece. And next to him, face lit up by the approaching bridge lights, a well-dressed teenage boy. Rex. The king. The one who had ordered the death of Robin Hudson. Bryan felt pure rage pulsate through his body. This motherfucker, this little piece of shit, this was the one that caused all of it.
He looks hurt, Sly,
Rex said.
Go make him hurt some more.
The thick-bodied snake face known as Sly smiled an evil smile, then leapt over the gun turret wall towards the deck 30 feet below. And there is episode number 37. I've been busting my fanny on this episode. 57 minutes is a massive amount of time for a podcast episode, in my opinion. 38 pages of text for that. Now, yes, I did tell you 37 would be the last episode. It's just I'm writing this as I go, and the ending is taking longer than I thought. There's a lot more going on. So I think 38 will be the last episode, although I won't lie, it could sneak out into number 39. Now, I told you about that 50-hour DVD. So what this is 50 hours worth of Sigler audiobooks. It's a do-it-yourself DVD. You can download the whole file, which includes all the labels, all the audio information, and instructions on how to put the thing together. So if you're strapped for cash or you just want to spread Siglerism around the holidays, and who wouldn't want to spread the message of death and doom around at the holidays? Gosh, I know I would. You can just work this DVD and give them out as presents to people. And if you know anybody into horror or science fiction or suspense or thrillers, who the hell wouldn't want to get 50 hours of free audiobooks for Christmas? So that information is over at scottsigler.com/DVD. And some other new stuff in case you missed it. The tour dates, times, cities, and bookstores have been announced. You can get all that information over at scottsigler.com/tour. And that includes an audio message from General Siglerissimo himself. The very first appearance of General Siglerissimo. So go check that out. And still up on the front page, you'll see the Goreline Thanksgiving 08 episode where I play a whole bunch of junkie calls and I give my feedback. And if you want to leave a message for Pope Siglericus XXX, you can call 206-666-4673. That's 206-666-GORE. Odds are good that we'll play that call in a future episode of either Nocturnal, Contagious, or The Crypt. Last note before we get to the promos, the publisher sent me my first copy of the Contagious hardcover. It looks fantastic. And while I might be biased, I think you'll be very happy with your money if you buy one of these suckers. And if you do want to pre-order, that's scottsigler.com/pre-order. I'm hoping that everyone pitches in so General Siglerissimo can make his run at the New York Times hardcover fiction bestseller list. If that happens, it would be the first time someone from social media, someone from podcasting, blogging, etc., has cracked what is known as the Super Bowl of the New York Times bestseller list, that of hardcover fiction, because that's the stuff that movies are made from, TV shows are made from. Social media leaders have cracked the business New York Times bestseller list. They have cracked the nonfiction New York Times bestseller list, namely Grammar Girl with her recent release, which was on the self-help New York Times bestseller list. But no one has got the brass ring of hardcover fiction. That would mean we're going toe-to-toe with the Stephen Kings, the Dean Koontzes, the Anne Rices, the Tom Clancys, and the Jeffrey Devers. And oh, if that happens, can't you just feel the little shiver in your spine to know that you, junkie, were part of making that happen? I was just talking to the Evil Queen about this earlier today. Just 3.5 years ago, I had absolutely nothing going on in the world of fiction. Then I started giving away my podcast, started with Earthcore. Here we are 3.5 years later. I have my second major hardcover coming out in a single year, in 2008. And what a wild, crazy, up and down year it has been. But all of that, all of this success is all because of you guys listening to the episodes and passing the information on to your friends in case they want to listen to the stories as well. So we are going for the throat of the publishing industry on December 30th. We're going for the brass ring. I really hope that we get it, and if we do get it, it's all because of y'all. So more good stuff coming your way very soon. I'm headed right back into the lab tomorrow, which is Monday morning, cranking away a Nocturnal till I finish that. Then we move on to Crypt episodes, and we move on to all that great content in the 12 Days of Sigmas. Thanks for listening to this obscenely long episode and letting me just choke your bandwidth while I shove this whole giant episode right down the throat of your bandwidth. And yeah, take it!
Hello, my name is Mike Bennett, and I'd just like to ask you, when was the last time you had a really enjoyable scare? One that made you scream and laugh at the same time? Which I suppose would sound something like this. You've never done that? Well, I suggest you trek over to MikeBennettPodcast.com and download one of my podcasts. One Among the Sleepless, Hall of Mirrors, Tales of Horror and the Grotesque, Mike Bennett Sometimes, or, coming in 2009, the horror thriller novel Underwood and Flinch. I can't guarantee you'll do this. But then, perhaps that's just as well.
MikeBennettPodcast.com.
You have been listening to Nocturnal, written and performed by Scott Sigler. For more information, go to scottsigler.com. All music in this podcast provided by Uncrowned off their album Devils and Angels, available now at the iTunes Music Store.
Is it